He didn't remove the shackles, Tribune. He gave her the entire hall and told us to look away. The young legionary Cotta swallowed hard, his armor squeaking in the suffocating silence of the praetorium. General Cassius Varus stood just 10 paces from the prisoner, a captured Dacia noblewoman, brought here in heavy chains, meant for immediate display and sentencing. Varus, the butcher of Mossia, was looking at the captive not with triumph, but with an impossible, terrible familiarity. The general had just violated the ritual of victory. This was not justice. This was something private, dangerous, and utterly forbidden. General Cassius Varus moved through the military camp of Singidunum with the deliberate, heavy grace of a man sculpted by iron and decree. The very ground seemed to vibrate with his authority. Dawn broke, but Varus was already at his command post, dictating orders to 3 different centurions simultaneously, his voice low, gravelly, yet carrying an undeniable edge that cut through the noise of 10,000 men preparing for deployment. He was the sword of Rome on the Danube, the one who quelled the Sarmatians, and whose mere signature sent entire tribes into flight. His routine was the foundation of the legion, precise, uncompromising, and absolutely unforgiving. Every morning began the same way: the inspection of the Aquila, the morning reports, the strategic assessment of the volatile frontier. But the authority was armor, not skin. Beneath the finely hammered lorica segmentata, the general was hollowed out by a wound that Rome did not recognize, the loss of his wife, Livia, 12 years prior, during a swift fever that struck her down in Italy while Varus was making his name in the northern campaigns. He hadn't been there. His ambition had kept him away. That absence was the core of his guilt, a silent, festering hole that no military victory could fill. He had won the whole world, but lost the only life that mattered. He finished reviewing the deployment map, his finger tracing the defensive line near the border. His tribune, Marcus, a young man eager for glory, waited for the next command. Varus noticed the tribune's hurried attempts to please, the constant deference. It was exhausting. It reminded him that everyone around him saw the general, the marble effigy, never the man who woke up every morning to the precise measurement of his failure. He dismissed Marcus with a terse nod and walked toward the tent's small private antechamber. There, nestled on a campaign desk, was a small carved wooden toy, a rocking horse Livia had made for the child they never had time to conceive. He touched the rough wood, his breath catching, the metallic taste of guilt rising in his throat. He permitted himself 10 seconds of weakness, no more. The legions did not run on sorrow. They ran on iron discipline. This morning, however, the routine was shattered. The prisoner was here. The Dacia noblewoman, brought in chains by the forward scouts, was awaiting judgment. She represented a final, desperate remnant of resistance, and Varus knew he should dispatch her immediately to solidify Rome's dominance. Yet he had issued the command that startled the entire garrison. Leave her alone. Guard the exits. Nobody speaks to her or looks at her. He looked at the map again, but his focus was broken. He saw only the line of the Danube and beyond it the ghost of Livia's smile. The prisoner was meant to be a symbol of victory, but when Varus had looked into her eyes moments before, he saw something else entirely, a mirror of his own deep, suppressed sorrow. He felt a sickening pull of recognition, a dangerous deviation from the path of duty he had trod for decades. He was the most powerful man on this frontier, and that power felt suddenly, terribly fragile. The war within him had just resumed. The air in the Praetorium kitchens was thick with the smell of smoke, fat, and despair. Gaius, a cook assigned to the general's personal mess, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a hand, scarred by 100 burns. He was small, frail, almost invisible among the brawny legionary cooks. Gaius wasn't a soldier. He was an auxiliary, brought from a captured Greek province years ago, forced into service as kitchen staff. His life was defined by the relentless cycle of preparation and cleanup, his limitations dictated by the heat of the oven and the endless demands of the Roman machine. His greatest fear was not the general's temper, but the subtle, gnawing exhaustion that threatened to make him clumsy, to drop the plate, to miss the order. A mistake here meant the lash, or worse, forced labor on the fortifications. He lived in the shadow, finding comfort only in the mechanical repetition of chopping vegetables and stirring thick stews. Gaius protected one thing: his younger sister, Maya, who lived discreetly in the civilian settlement just outside the camp gates. He sent her scraps, meager coins, and the occasional stolen piece of fabric, whispering reassurances that Rome, though brutal, was predictable. As long as he stayed invisible, Maya was safe. His life was a silent offering for hers. He was kneading dough for the midday bread when the first detachment brought in the Dacian prisoner. Gaius was pressed against the wall, out of the way, his head bowed. He saw only the boots of the escorts and the heavy black iron of the chains dragging on the polished floor. But then he heard the voice of the general, sharp and clear. "Tribune, clear the hall, and you, cook, turn your back. Everyone leaves the prisoner." The unusual command caused a ripple of confusion, but Varus's authority was absolute. Gaius obeyed, facing the greasy wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He heard the guards retreat, the doors clang shut, leaving only Varus and the captive alone in the vast, echoing space of the reception hall. Gaius kept kneading the dough, but his senses were screaming. He knew the general's routine better than anyone. He tasted the difference in Varus's wine, saw the micro-expressions of his rage and exhaustion, and now he felt the heavy, wrong silence that permeated the air from the hall. He knew something was wrong, far beyond the protocol violation. Curiosity, a dangerous luxury, pulled at him. He risked a sideways glance toward the massive door. He saw nothing, but then a faint sound carried through the thick wood. The sound of Varus speaking, not in the commanding Latin of a conqueror, but in a softer, almost forgotten dialect. And the response from the prisoner was a single gasping syllable full of old grief. Gaius quickly pressed his knuckles to his mouth, pretending to cough. He understood the dialect. It was the ancient tongue of his own people, spoken now only in the deepest corners of the empire. A common tongue shared between the butcher of Moesia and the captured noblewoman. He knew what that connection meant, a secret that could destroy the general, condemn the prisoner, and turn the whole campaign into chaos. He knew something that should not be known, something about the general's private wound and this captive's tragic identity. But he did not yet grasp the magnitude of the danger. "Tell me, from where are you watching this story unfold today?" The tension in the camp thickened around the prisoner like swamp fog. The general had housed the Dacian woman, whose name was rumored to be Vala, not in the usual military prison pits, but in a small sealed chamber adjacent to his own personal quarters, a blatant, dangerous disregard for security protocol. Gaius, the cook, now found his duties shifting to service the general's private dining area, which meant passing within a breath of the sealed chamber several times a day. It happened during the evening meal preparation. Varus required a specific, simple broth for his digestion, and Gaius was tasked with delivering it directly to the antechamber table. As he approached, tray balanced precariously, he heard the faint sound of metal scraping, Vala moving her chains inside the room. He placed the bowl down quickly, his eyes fixed on the heavy oak door. He felt the cold radiation of her presence, the forced stillness of a powerful life held captive. He couldn't see her, but he saw the effect of her imprisonment on Varus. The general was usually impeccably ordered, his belongings placed with military precision. But tonight, a single scroll lay crumpled on the floor near the door, discarded in anger or haste. Gaius hesitated. Picking up discarded items was part of his duty, minimizing clutter in the general's space. He bent down, his calloused fingers brushing against the heavy parchment. It wasn't a standard military dispatch. It was a formal decree from the Senate, written in archaic ceremonial language. He didn't dare unroll it completely, but the large black ink on the top line seared itself into his memory. The official decree listing the captured enemies of the state, their crimes, and their mandated punishment. The third name down was Vala, daughter of the Dacian chieftain. Her crime, inciting rebellion and high treason against Rome. Her required sentence, public execution and dispersal of her lineage. Gaius's blood ran cold. He quickly smoothed the parchment and placed it on the desk. This was not merely a captive. She was an execution order waiting to happen. And Varus, the man who enforced Rome's will with legendary ruthlessness, was delaying it, keeping the victim impossibly close. He retreated silently, his steps quick and measured. Later, as he was stacking firewood near the exterior wall, he saw Varus emerge, his face etched with sleeplessness and indecision. The general did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man caught between two blades. Varus paused right beside Gaius, his focus lost somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls. He inhaled deeply, perhaps sensing the same thick, humid air that carried the threat of the enemy outside and the greater threat of the secret inside. Their lives had just intertwined, the mighty general whose fate was sealed by an old love and a secret prisoner, and the humble cook who held the knowledge of that terrible contradiction. Gaius knew this intimacy with power was deadly. A storm was brewing, and he was standing right in its eye. Something was about to break. The days crawled by, each one pressing down on Gaius with the weight of the secret. The entire garrison was focused on the general's increasing volatility, shorter temper, longer hours, impossible demands. They attributed it to the pressure of the frontier war, the expected backlash from the captured Dacian leader. They were wrong. Gaius saw the real sign, the one that screamed of an internal rupture that no one else noticed. It involved the water. General Varus was known for his stringent hygiene, demanding fresh, cool water brought from the cleanest spring miles away. Every morning Gaius would fill the bronze pitcher in Varus's antechamber, but Varus never drank the water left near Vala's guarded room, fearing contamination perhaps, or out of routine separation. Yet one morning Gaius entered and saw the pitcher near Vala's door almost empty. That was strange enough. Varus had clearly consumed the water, but the crucial detail, the one that made Gaius's breath hitch, was what was floating at the bottom of the pitcher. A tiny, shriveled purple flower. Gaius knew that flower. It was the Stellaria, a small, bitter bloom that grew high in the mountains of Dacia, and which the locals used in their rituals for the dead, a symbol of remembrance and everlasting sorrow. It did not grow in the Roman-controlled basin of the Danube. Varus hadn't brought it. The flower must have come from Vala. The general had placed the flower in the water, or perhaps Vala had managed to pass it out, and Varus had deliberately kept it near him, accepting this silent token of shared indigenous grief. Gaius felt a wave of icy doubt mixed with fear. He realized the conversation he had overheard in the ancient dialect was not an interrogation, it was a communion. Vala and Varus shared a past, a history that transcended the war, the empire, and the chains that bound her. The general was not holding a prisoner. He was concealing a devastating intimacy. He quickly fished the flower out, wrapping it tightly in his apron before emptying the remaining water. He did not know the specifics of their connection. Were they childhood friends, enemies with a mutual respect, or something far more dangerous like forbidden lovers from a past campaign? But the fact that the butcher of Rome was hiding a Dacia death ritual flower was a sign of treason, of a loyalty fractured by memory. His duty was clear: report the incoherence, speak to the tribune, save the legion from the general's madness. But the thought of speaking, of stepping out of the shadows, brought the image of Maia, his sister, to mind. If he spoke, he risked exposing himself, becoming a visible problem, and Rome had a brutal way of solving problems. He stuffed the flower into the deepest pocket of his tunic. He felt the dry petals scratch against his skin. It was a secret, dangerous artifact. He was paralyzed by the choice: keep silent and watch the general collapse, perhaps taking the entire border with him, or speak up and lose the only life he held precious. He still hesitated, hoping the signal would resolve itself, hoping Varus would return to his senses. He did not know how long he could afford to wait. The following day, Varus received the official dispatch. The Senate had confirmed Vala's execution order. The messenger courier arrived just after midday. The general read the scroll in the full view of his officers, his face an impassive mask of Roman resolve. The public execution was scheduled for the next morning, sunrise in front of the assembled legions, a necessary display of force to quell any burgeoning dissent. Gaius was present in the mess hall, scrubbing the floor near the general's table, his back aching, his mind racing. He saw the cold finality in the tribune Marcus's eyes, the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. Gaius knew this timeline meant the secret would be buried with Vala. If he intended to act, it had to be now. The general would surely carry out the order, choosing duty over memory. He finished his scrubbing, his movements slow and deliberate, working his way towards the main hearth where the dinner fires were being stoked. He needed an opportunity to be near the Tribune Marcus, but the risk of speaking was too great. He reached into his pocket and felt the dry, brittle petals of the Stellaria flower. No, he couldn't speak. He wouldn't risk Maya, but he could leave a trail, a sign, something undeniable yet disposable. Gaius knew that Tribune Marcus was obsessively neat, prone to recording every detail of the general's activities. Marcus's personal field diary, bound in fine leather, lay on a side cabinet, a terrible temptation. He waited for the precise moment when Marcus turned his back to supervise the distribution of wine. With a sickening lurch of fear, Gaius moved, his heart drumming against his ribs. He didn't touch the flower. Instead, he took the small, obsidian sharpening stone he used for his knives. He swiftly walked past the cabinet, and with a silent, desperate scratch, he carved 3 tiny, jagged lines onto the leather binding of Marcus's diary. 3 lines, a symbol of the old Dacian language, a crude representation of the word Livia, the name of the general's lost wife, a word no Roman in the camp would associate with Dacia or the prisoner Vala. It was an act of raw, terrifying courage. It wasn't a confession or a detailed report. It was an anomaly, an incoherence, a strange, non-Roman marking on the property of the tribune, connected to the impending execution. Gaius knew Marcus's meticulous nature would ensure he saw the scratch, and Marcus, seeing the strange marking just hours before the execution, would be forced to question its origin, its connection to the captive, and perhaps the general's unsettling behavior. Gaius returned to his work, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the ladle. He had committed an act of treason, not against Rome but against the safety of his own invisibility. The silence in the room, now filled with the clatter of bronze and the murmur of Latin, felt unbearably heavy. He had exposed the core of Varus's tragedy, hoping the tribune's duty would force him to connect the disparate pieces, the general's dead wife, the captive noblewoman, and the language they shared. The story had pivoted, set into motion by 3 insignificant scratches. Tribune Marcus discovered the scratches immediately upon returning to his desk. He ran his thumb over the crude, unnatural lines carved into the pristine leather of his diary. They were too purposeful to be an accident, too geometric to be a random mark. They were symbols, alien and unsettling. Marcus was loyal, but his loyalty was to the order of Rome, not to the flawed man who wore the general's insignia. He remembered the strange commands regarding the prisoner, the general's unprecedented withdrawal, and the unsettling atmosphere of secrets permeating the headquarters. He dismissed the orderly and closed the tent flap, pulling the diary close. He didn't recognize the marks, but they felt primitive, like the scribbles he had seen on captured Dacian artifacts. He searched his mind for a connection, cycling through Varus's history, the current campaign, and the execution scheduled for dawn. Then, a fragment of gossip, overheard weeks ago and dismissed as drunken rumor, flared in his memory. The story of General Varus's young wife, Livia, traveling with him during an early, less documented campaign into the northern territories, a campaign that ended abruptly with her death back in Italy. The rumor suggested she had not died of fever, but of a deep, secret sorrow, perhaps related to a forbidden friendship she had forged with the women of a newly conquered tribe. Marcus stood, the connection slamming into him with the force of a battering ram. The general had delayed the execution. He was concealing the prisoner. And now a foreign symbol was carved onto his private property, hours before the captive was due to die. Driven by a sudden, cold sense of impending catastrophe, Marcus acted outside the protocol. He did not seek Varus. Instead, he went straight to the sealed chamber where Vala was held. He ordered the guards to stand down. Using the general's signet ring, claiming an urgent pre-execution interrogation was required, he entered the chamber. Vala sat on a cot, chains heavy around her wrists, her eyes fierce despite her situation. "I need to know what those marks mean," Marcus hissed, holding up the diary, pointing to the 3 carved lines. "The man who guards you, Varus, his wife, Livia. Is there a connection?" Vala looked at the marks, and the fierce light in her eyes shattered. A tear tracked a path through the grime on her cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "You knew Livia," Marcus whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. That symbol, those scratches, they mean something to him. Is Varus protecting you because of his wife? Vala finally spoke, her voice dry and low in flawless perfect Latin. "He is not protecting me, Tribune. He is guarding Rome's greatest shame. Livia was my sister." The Tribune stumbled back, hitting the rough stone wall. Vala, the fierce Dacian noblewoman scheduled for execution, was the sister of General Varus's dead Roman wife. The implication was seismic. Varus had married into the very bloodline he was now eradicating. The delay, the secrecy, the forbidden dialect, it was all Varus trying to reconcile his honor with a monstrous, hidden family duty. If the Senate learned of this, Varus would fall, and the entire frontier command would destabilize. Marcus was now holding not a rumor, but a truth that could topple the general and compromise the safety of the entire border. Urgency consumed him. He had to stop Varus from making his final terrible choice. Tribune Marcus burst into Varus's tent an hour before the planned execution, foregoing all protocol. The general was already dressed in his polished ceremonial armor, ready to oversee the morning's grim display. The sight of Varus, formidable and untouchable, made Marcus hesitate, but the image of Vala's tearful confession propelled him forward. "General," Marcus stated, his voice tight, holding out the diary, "these marks, the prisoner, I know." Varus didn't flinch. His face remained stone, but his hands, resting on the pommel of his sword, clenched. "Know what, Tribune? You defy my direct orders to interrupt me hours before I execute an enemy of the state. I know Vala is Livia's sister," Marcus pressed, throwing the diary onto the general's map table. "I know the forbidden dialect you spoke, and I know you have been protecting her, or perhaps yourself, from this devastating truth." The air in the tent became instantly heavy, suffocating. Varus finally moved, sweeping the diary and maps onto the floor with a roar of frustrated agony. "You know nothing of duty, Marcus, nothing of the impossible choices that sustain the empire." "Duty is truth, General. Treason is silence," Marcus countered, his young face pale but resolute. "Livia died because of the conflict between her loyalty to you and her loyalty to her own bloodline, a bloodline you now hold in chains. If the Senate discovers you married into Dacia's royal family, your life, your legacy, and this entire campaign will be erased." Varus walked toward the Tribune, his sheer physical presence overwhelming. "Livia was separated from her sister years before Rome found her. She chose me. She chose Rome. Vala chose resistance. Her fate is sealed by her actions, not by my broken marriage. I am carrying out the law." "No, you are carrying out the Senate's mandate to hide the truth," Marcus shouted, pointing at the chamber door. "You are executing her before a proper investigation because you fear what she might say, that Livia was not a pure Roman bride, but a diplomatic captive. You are sacrificing Vala to save your own honor." Varus froze. The accusation struck at the very core of his 12 years of guilt. He had loved Livia, but had he used her Roman identity as a shield? Had he allowed her to erase her past to secure his future? He lowered his head, the metal of his helmet cold against his temple. "If she speaks, Rome loses faith in my authority. Chaos will erupt across the border. I will do what I must." "And what of Gaius, the auxiliary cook?" Marcus demanded, pushing the final terrible piece into place. "He is the one who left the sign. He knows the language, General. He knows your shame. If Vala dies, her secret dies. But your secret remains, carried by an insignificant cook who just risked his life to expose your lie. You are not safe, General. No lie is large enough to contain this truth." Varus looked toward the kitchen staff's quarters, his eyes finally showing a flicker of true fear. Not fear of the Senate, but fear of the invisible man who had seen his weakness and dared to act. The cold facade of power had crumbled. The consequence of the Tribune's accusation was swift, brutal, and silent. Varus, unable to move forward with the execution while the truth stood exposed, gave a single terse order. "The prisoner remains in detention. Execution postponed." General orders a strategic shift in force display. The legions assembled at dawn were confused, then restless. then openly murmuring. The momentum of victory was lost in the uncertainty. Varus, the man of unwavering resolve, had hesitated. His authority, built on decades of predictable ruthlessness, suffered a mortal blow. The fallout hit the immediate players. Varus could not afford to execute Vala, yet he could not release her. He chose the most crushing path: immediate, non-official isolation. Vala was moved to a deep military bunker beneath the fortifications, her name removed from all public records, her existence erased. She lost her identity, becoming a ghost in the Roman machine, a permanent prisoner used as a silent, terrible shield against the general's past. She had earned her life, but lost her freedom forever. Tribune Marcus, though he had saved the general from a catastrophic moral choice, had committed the ultimate breach of protocol. Varus did not condemn him, but he did not forgive him either. Marcus was immediately relieved of his post as tribune and reassigned to the most desolate frontier outpost, a punishment worse than death, obscurity. He lost his career, his potential legacy, and his place in the Roman elite. The truth had saved Rome from instability, but it destroyed Marcus's future. But the most immediate consequence fell upon Gaius. Varus, knowing the identity of the person who placed the sign, sent the Praetorian Guard not to punish, but to retrieve. Gaius was dragged from the kitchens covered in flour and sweat. He was brought before Varus, who was stripped of his armor, sitting heavily at his campaign desk. "You knew," Varus stated, his voice devoid of anger, only exhaustion. "You risked your life for a truth that would destroy us all." Gaius did not deny it. He simply pleaded, "My sister Maia, she is outside the gates. I only ask that she remain safe, General. I acted for the truth, but I live for her." Varus nodded slowly. He understood the sacrifice. He understood the private duty. He wrote a brief, heavily sealed document. "You will be transferred immediately, Gaius, far from here. Not as a slave, but as an aide in a remote supply depot. You are protected by this order, but you will never see the Central Legions again. Your knowledge is a burden you must carry alone." Gaius realized the price. He was being exiled, silenced by displacement. He would be safe, and Maia would be safe under the protection of the general's guilt. But he lost his home, his anonymity, and the small connection he had to his sister. He had saved the general's honor, but in doing so, he had become a permanent witness to a truth too painful to speak. He had traded fear for loneliness, safety for exile. Nobody emerged whole from the wreckage of Varus's secret. Months later, far from the brutal, ironclad order of Singidunum, Gaius found himself at a quiet supply depot high in the Carpathian foothills. The air was clean, the workload manageable, and the isolation was absolute. He had lost the bustle of the large camp, the constant scent of fear and the proximity to Maia, yet he was free. He wore a simple tunic, no longer covered in grease and soot, and held a position of modest, clean duty. The transformation was quiet. Gaius, the invisible cook, had found a dignity he never possessed in the center of power. He was no longer defined by his fear, but by his courage. He regularly received small sealed packages containing simple goods, flour, cloth, dried herbs, sent via military courier. They contained no messages, but they were proof. Maia was safe, living well in the civilian settlement, protected by the general's enduring silent debt. General Cassius Varus remained at the frontier, his authority slightly tarnished but intact. He was harder now, less prone to the subtle human slips that had exposed him. He had chosen the empire, but the choice had cost him the last vestiges of his peace. His victory was now tainted by the ghost of the sister-in-law he kept locked away, a constant reminder of Livia, and the blood he had denied. He had become a better general, perhaps, but a hollower man. His hope was gone, replaced by endless cold duty. One late afternoon, while cataloguing wine amphorae, Gaius received a final strange shipment. It was a small wooden chest, wrapped in rough, unfamiliar cloth. Inside, nestled among protective straw, was the small rocking horse Varus had kept on his desk, the one Livia had carved. It was not a message of reconciliation, but a final shared burden of memory. Gaius sat on the depot floor, turning the wooden toy over in his hands. It represented the love that broke the general, the forbidden bond between Livia and Vala, and the chaos he himself had dared to expose. The terror was gone. What remained was a quiet understanding. Even the greatest power could be undone by a single honest act of courage from the smallest person. He had earned his freedom not by fighting Rome, but by forcing Rome's highest representative to look at the truth. He placed the horse on a shelf near his bed, a silent memorial to the lives sacrificed for honor and love. He knew he would never be truly free of the general's shadow, but he was free of his own terror. He looked out at the distant hills where the Stellaria flower might grow, and felt a profound, gentle hope. The world was not saved, but his own small corner of it was safe, and the dignity he had stolen back was finally his. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more intense tales like this one.